Hello everyone and welcome back again. Courage Bacchus. It's really important that we recognize our new guest, and this is Wayne Sinclair. I'm very excited to be talking to him about ICED. Wayne, I noticed you have some information here with you. What is that about?
Yeah, you had mentioned ICED. That's the International Congress on the Education of the Deaf. And I have some materials here. This Congress meets every 4 years. And they had started back in the 1800s, 1870. And it's teachers from around the world who teach deaf people come together, share their ideas, and they make decisions about policies. They talk about how to improve deaf education. And I had brought in this document here. The International Congress had made a huge mistake back in 1880. Do you know what happened in 1880?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, they were in Milan, in Italy. That is where their Congress was being held that year. And they had come in, and through the process, they had made several resolutions to ban the use of sign language in classrooms. And that was a decision that had an impact all over the world. At the time, they had said that oralism was the best approach to teach deaf children instead of using sign language. So those resolutions were passed at the Congress. So that's why I've decided to bring in these materials, and I'm wanting to talk about the ramifications of what happened and why that happened. And I have got involved. The reason I got involved is because I live here. I'm here in Vancouver, and the Congress was happening in Vancouver in 2010. When I had realized that the Congress was happening here, I figured out that I needed to do something. I had to get the deaf community involved. We had to do some work and get some advocates involved in the process before the Congress happened in 2010. In Hamburg, Germany, they had their Congress in 1980, and they had tried to remove these resolutions that they had made in 1880 in Milan. However, they were unsuccessful. They also had a Congress in Rochester, New York, and that was 1990. The American deaf population had tried to have those resolutions removed. Again, though, it was unsuccessful. So I figured it was 2010, and why not try? So we'd had a number of town hall meetings to get deaf community members together. We talked about the history, what had happened, the background, all of the information you would need to become an advocate and get involved with this issue. Our efforts started to take off, and soon we had international interest, and thankfully nowadays we have the internet. Before the 80s, we didn't have the internet. The 90s, the internet was kind of out there, but in 2010, everyone is on the internet. And through the internet, we had international involvement. We were then able to contact the World Federation of the Deaf, and they're headquartered in Finland. So we had been in correspondence with them through this whole process. We had been in contact with the Canadian Association of the Deaf. And the Canadian Association of the Deaf is a member of the World Federation of the Deaf. So that is how we established those relationships. It was an awesome process that we could all work together on this. And it was a critical issue that we had to work on. Now, I don't know if I can say there's something wrong with the oral approach, but I feel like for all deaf people should have access to sign language. An English speaker can just talk away. And Natasha, I'm sure you're not understanding what's on my lips right now.
No, I can't make out a word you're saying.
Oh, come on, why can't you read my lips? What is wrong with you, Natasha?
Well, there's nothing wrong with me.
That's what they thought back in 1880. They thought if you were unable to speak, you were dumb. So they thought that this was a new approach that would be more successful, and it spread after that Congress. It was thought that if you weren't able to speak, that there was something wrong with you. And that was a view that was propagated from that.
Well, that's completely untrue.
That is how people feel, though, and what is out there. Makes you mad, right?
Absolutely. I would prefer to use sign language to communicate.
So in 1880, after these resolutions were passed, there was a resolution that the oral approach was more effective in helping deaf children to improve their literacy, that they would learn more through an oral approach with them speaking and trying to lip read, that they would then be able to socialize more with spoken language users. After those resolutions were passed, there was a number of consequences that happened. A lot of deaf teachers lost their jobs, as they thought deaf people can't teach deaf children to lip read. So after that, many, many deaf teachers in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, were fired. They lost their jobs. There was then more of an emphasis put on lip reading and using the oral approach. And, you know, to admit, I'm getting up in my years here. I'm almost at 70 now. I was in school back in 1949, though, a long time ago. And when I came into the school system, I was lost. I was trying to talk and was trying to make sense of things. It was a struggle for me. And I was always supposed to be practicing my speech. I was supposed to practice words, practice speaking English. And I would try and have conversations. I would feel what the breath coming out of someone's mouth felt like and then try and mimic that when I was trying to speak. I remember seeing someone sign, and it was amazing. However, we were always punished if we signed.
What kind of punishment?
We would get demerits. And, you know, at 6 years old, getting demerits was fairly upsetting.
Absolutely.
And it was because I was trying to use my hands and sign. We learned through that process to be ashamed of the use of sign language. As a student on the bus, we would always sit in the back of the bus, and we would be sitting back there hiding our signs. There would be all other students using spoken language, and we would be in the back of the bus using sign language. That is the type of thing that we went through and what became ingrained in us. And I remember they would always discourage the use of sign language by deaf adults in front of us. It was a very complex system of oppression. However, these days, this is a different world. We can now sign openly without feeling that type of embarrassment and being ashamed of it.
Wow.
So I've wondered, I learned back in the day that it was wrong to be deaf. I was oppressed when I was in school. I always wondered why I was deaf, why I had ended up deaf, what made me this way.
Yeah, I know where you're coming from.
And that is all from those powerful resolutions that were passed in 1880, and they had widespread sweeping effects. I had talked with my mom when I was young. I asked her why I never signed. I think I was about 13 when I had this conversation with her. My parents use spoken language, and they had told me that I was going to school and I wasn't supposed to sign at school at all. I had to go and learn to speak.
That's just not acceptable.
Yeah, I agree, it's not acceptable. I had talked with my mom, I guess you could say, and asked her why I shouldn't be learning sign language. And she had gone into the PTA, the Parent Advisory Group, at Jericho Hill School. And she had talked with them. There was one person there that was from St. Louis, Missouri. They were from the Center of the Institution for the Deaf. It was an oral program for deaf education, and they had brought in this speaker to talk about educating deaf children. And they had said that deaf people are a small percentage of people in the world. And they thought, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Which meant, as the majority of people were speaking, that deaf people should then speak like them.
That's just not acceptable.
I agree.
That is incredibly oppressive. It is denying the person's identity. That's just incredible to me.
So I guess you were born many years after I was then.
I was, and thank God.
Yes.
Thank God I could use sign language. I can't imagine what it was like. And if I were in your shoes back then, I would have been really angry. And not just for a short term, but for the long term.
Yeah. There is a lot of anger out there among deaf people. They had learned to not trust people who can hear. And, you know, in my opinion, I've been through it all. I've been through the frustrations and the struggles. Going through the system, I eventually ended up at Gallaudet University, and I saw that they had people there who used spoken language but could sign as well. And that experience opened doors for me. It was an amazing experience that I had at Gallaudet University. It's in Washington, D.C. And I just got there, and it blew my mind. While I was there, I got my BA, and I got my master's. I was studying to become a teacher of the deaf, so I was in the master's program. And they required that I take a speech development course. I had to take a course about how to teach lip reading. And when I was there, I kept questioning why I had to do this, why I had to take this course. They had told me it was required by the various states to be a teacher. And of course, those state regulations were influenced by the resolutions passed in 1880 in Milan.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful what happened in 1880. So why?
Well, yeah. So getting back to this document. So in 2010, actually probably before 2010, 2008 or 2009, we had started our work, and it had spread quite rapidly. It became an international movement. And we had worked with the planning committee for the International Congress on the Education of the Deaf. And we had been working with them. We had several people. We had Monty Hardy. We had Nigel Howard. Who else? We had a small team that was negotiating for us. And there were also some other deaf people, Janice Lyons, Heather Hussey, Doug Lambert. Who else would have been involved? If I forgot anyone, I am sorry. Forgive me. So there were all these people involved in working on this movement. And ICED 2010 had 2 deaf members on their planning committee, and we were working with them. Joe McLaughlin was one of them, and Vincent Chauvet was another one. So we were working with the 2 of them who were involved on ICED's part to try and change their perceptions. It wasn't easy. We wanted an apology from them. We needed to get an apology. It just felt that it was time for an apology because of all the damage that was caused from those resolutions. In 1880, they had said that teachers should develop textbooks for the deaf. And I remember I had one of the Nottingham language books from the Clark School, and it was a little flip-up book, and it was just supposed to be kind of simple and easy. But now looking back at using that book, it didn't teach us to think. It didn't teach us to become creative. It didn't teach us to question and to try things, to experiment. It taught us procedures, like how to write English. When, who, then the verb, and it was a structured approach. It almost felt robotic. Us learning English was very robotic. It was this word, then that word. There was no flexibility, there was no creativity in how to assemble the language. And that was another area of schooling that was impacted from the 1880 Milan Conference. Deaf education has suffered since that. The life quality of deaf people has suffered since that. Deaf people sometimes leave school, at grade 3, 4, or 5 reading levels when they've graduated. They are very intelligent, but they are unfortunately illiterate or have very low literacy. And unfortunately, they also typically have broken sign language, American Sign Language, and broken English.
I agree.
They are very smart people, working as a mechanic or something, just incredibly talented in a number of different areas, but they're stuck. They have barriers.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
That's exactly what is out there. So we had worked on this. I think we had started probably September 2009, and we worked on it till probably 10 days before the Congress was scheduled to start. We were in negotiations. We were going back and forth, and the two sides were pushing each other to come to some type of an agreement. We had things that we wanted to see in this agreement. And I do have the original copy here. I can make copies from this if you would like them.
Yes, I'd be very interested.
It is a fairly lengthy document I have here, but it comes down to that we are rejecting all of the resolutions that were passed from the 1880 Milan Conference, and we wanted an apology. We wanted them to admit that something wrong had been done. We wanted it to be seen that deaf and people who can hear are equals. Mutual respect from both spoken language users and sign language users.
I agree. So why was that such an important issue, though?
Well, you may be familiar with Japanese Canadians, Chinese Canadians, a number of different cultural groups have requested apologies and got them. Apologies are kind of like magic. Someone apologizes for something and almost immediately you feel like an equal. You feel better about it. Now, we did not get an apology. I wanted the apology and I wish they would have given us the apology. But they had said that they regretted what had happened before, and that, I guess, was kind of an apology. It worked. And we wanted to make changes so that it would be seen around the world that there's nothing wrong with someone being deaf. We wanted it to be much like someone who's a Japanese Canadian feels equal to someone who is Caucasian. We just wanted cultural respect and to be seen as equals. Deaf people do have their own culture, and that culture comes from finding ways to survive and live. A deaf person needs a light signaling device or a TTY, an old-fashioned technology now, but we are looking for video relay service.
Yeah, I definitely want to see that happen.
So there are a number of kind of adaptations that deaf people use, and we are just looking for equality. And I think that that is all that I'm looking for. And my desire for that equality is something that I'm willing to fight for and have been fighting for.
I definitely think that respect and equality is so important, because with that, anything's possible. Rather than that, you have a divide, you have inequality, you have disempowerment. But when you have that bridge, you have equal citizens. And I really think it's important to be proud of being deaf. I didn't think that way when I was a kid. I was hard of hearing. I didn't know whether I belonged in the hearing world or the world that uses spoken language or the deaf world, the world that uses sign language. You know, I was involved in sports, I was involved in the school for the deaf, but it was still very difficult. And it wasn't until I went off to university that I realized, and it was the same university, Gallaudet, that really changed my outlook. And it was because of that, and I'm really thankful that you've been involved in your role as an advocate and making inroads with the ICED, with the Congress. I mean, that's invaluable what you've done.
Mm-hmm. I have, this is a magazine coming out of the United States, a deaf magazine, and they had talked about ICED 2010 in this issue. And the article is called Repairing the Damage from Milan, 1880. This does talk a little bit about what happened in 2010, but mostly it focuses on the historical point of view and what happened in 1880. I have another publication here. This is a Swedish publication. Unfortunately, I don't understand what it's saying here, foreign language to me, but I know that it is talking about ICED as well. Let me just take a look for the section in here. It is in Swedish here, and I don't know what it's saying, but I do know the last word they have here, applauder, is about applause. And that is about the rejection of the resolutions passed in 1880. And they are celebrating those. Britain also has their own publication that had talked about it. That's the British Deaf News here.
Oh, the British Deaf News.
And they're talking about ICED 2010 as well. It was a worldwide event. Many, many nations were looking to see what was going to happen.
This is fabulous, Wayne.
Also, Ontario has a publication that I brought in here as well. It is, really, we are making changes. And there are some things, 2010 was important, and before things were changing, but 2010 started some things. And we're now seeing those changes. And we're now taking a second look at communication options. Previously, I would say, probably before the 1970s, parents would look at different communication options. There was American Sign Language. There was Signing Exact English 1, Signing Exact English 2. There was Pidgin English, or whatever that was being called. There was the oral approach. And parents were supposed to make a decision about what approach to use. That was back in 1970. That continued on for quite some time. And now we're finding, and we feel, that ASL is a true language. But previously, people didn't think that American Sign Language was a language. They thought it was just kind of some made-up system of hand gestures, or it was not recognized as an actual language. However, now it is recognized as its own language, similar to English. And people have thought that ASL and English are similar. However, they're not. ASL has influences from French, and English obviously has British influences. So they are not similar. They are separate languages. And people have tried to add in parts of English into American Sign Language, which has caused issue over the years. There have been a number of different ways of signing things because of how the people have tried to inject English into ASL. The sentence structures have been altered or people have tried to alter them to make it more like English. However, it doesn't make sense. In American Sign Language, those structures don't work. So parents are given different options. However, we're starting to say, don't let the parents make decisions. Just let the deaf child be deaf. There will be a natural process. The child will pick up sign language. They will learn English or French or German, whatever other languages they want. They will do it by themselves. There are over 200 different signed languages in the world.
That many?
200. All over the world, there are different signed languages.
That's amazing. That's lovely.
And there are so many languages out there. And through those languages, someone can then understand their environment, can understand their world, and develop their own identity. They can develop self-esteem and feel good about themselves and feel accepted as who they are. And then they can start to develop relationships.
Do you feel that because of your involvement in the 2010 Congress that the inroads have been made? Where do you think it's going to go next?
Well, I think things have been happening. The BC government back, I think it was 2011, I think, March of 2011, they had said that deaf children are too difficult to teach. It is in the policy. Deaf children are too difficult to teach. And I feel that none of them actually know how to sign. Whoever wrote the policy has no background knowledge on this, and we need to make changes there.
Well, thank you very much for watching and tuning in today. We've had a very good discussion, and I know that this discussion will continue on. Thanks. We'll have to wrap it up for today.